All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for an intro to advanced analytics for Zoho Books. So this is going to be a great session. It was actually put together by the Zenatta Consulting Group, and we'll introduce them and ourselves here in a second right after some housekeeping items. So today's session is hosted by the Zoho CPA team. So zoho.com/CPA. Accountants and bookkeepers are welcome. I'll let Val kind of talk about that here in a little bit. So let me go ahead and introduce the Zoho team. We have Val Steed, who's our resident CPA over here at Zoho, and he's the Director of Accountants. Val?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for those of you in different places. And thanks for being here. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll make this very quick. I'm a CPA by background, but mostly always involved in accounting technology for many years. So it's a pleasure to be here. And I want to make sure we get most of our time for Zenatta today.
Yeah, thank you, Val. And then we also have Dheeraj VN. He'll be in the background answering any questions. I'll just let him introduce himself real quick.
Cut him with his mic off.
Yeah. Dheeraj, it's okay. But he'll be in the background. He helps out our team a lot. He's a part of the finance team as well, the partner program. And my name is Nathan Rogerson. I'm the marketing manager over here at Zoho, and I help put together webinars like this and really put together great partners to help present to you guys and show you what they've been doing and also give great insight on the world of Zoho. Now, let me go ahead and introduce the Zenatta consulting team. We have Brett Martin, who's the president, and Tyler Colt, who's the executive vice president. I do want to mention a few things about them before they introduce themselves. So they are top Zoho Premier Partner. They have expertise in all Zoho applications. And for the past 9 years, they've been doing Zoho development, which is awesome. And they have the fastest growing Zoho YouTube channel. And they have a weekly CRM Zen show and a weekly newsletter. But what's actually funny about this, I want to say this real quick before I let y'all introduce yourselves, is I use you guys to interview with Zoho. I actually was watching some of your videos, and it really helped me during my interview process. So thank you for that. I think that's pretty funny. Small world. But anyways, yeah.
I'm glad we could help.
Yeah. Anyways, I'll let Brett introduce himself and Tyler next.
Yeah, I'm Brett Martin. I'm the president of Zenatta Consulting. And Nathan, Val, thanks so much for having us here today. We're really happy that we can help you with this. And with me is Tyler Colt, who's really going to be carrying the bulk of this today. We talk about with our 17 employees, I think we have 4 that are real wizards with analytics and the finance suite. And Tyler is one of those as well. So I think we really got some interesting and fun stuff here. So Tyler.
Yeah, thanks for having us, both to Nathan, Val, and everyone who decided to join for today.
Yeah, thanks Tyler and Brett, and thanks for putting together this presentation for us. Really appreciate it. I'll go ahead and let Val introduce Zoho, just in case you're not familiar with all of Zoho's applications, because like what I mentioned, Zenatta does touch all these applications in some form. So Val, go ahead.
Right. Welcome, folks. Just a quick about Zoho as a SaaS cloud-based software company. We have a lot of apps, and I don't want to dive into too much into the apps here because I think we can get lost quite quickly. But there's at least 40 plus apps and interconnected and 7 different suites. So there's a lot to digest. Today, what we want to focus in on, pretty much the finance suite. And in the finance suite, we want to kind of focus in on the books and also analytics, which kind of ties into books. So you could actually get our software a la carte. You could buy it in a suite. We even have a all-in-one pricing, Zoho One pricing. But today we're really focusing on 2 specific apps and what we could do with analytics and with books. So just kind of be aware of that. There's a lot more we could do a different day, and we'll kind of keep that going down the road. Get back to that Zoho Finance Partner Program. We have really tried to reach out and provide capabilities and support and help for accountants, bookkeepers, and professional accountants, CPAs, others. So what we did is we really set up a website, zoho.com/CPA. From there, we're, as a team, we're going to help you, magnify your visibility, help your network grow, and get a lot of Zoho feedback and help. The key thing is what we'd like to do is have you come in there and sign up as a partner, if you don't mind. So if you wouldn't mind going to zoho.com/CPA, consider what we're doing, sign up, and that would allow us to talk with you and work with you. And there is no risk in signing up. The other thing too is I know that a lot of you in here are just looking for specific Zoho help. That's why we're thrilled to be partnering with Zenatta today and their capabilities and what they can do to help you as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Val. And I'll go ahead and launch the first poll question, why I transfer control over to Tyler. And it's really asking, are you interested in the finance partner program? And kind of like what Val was mentioning earlier, it really can help grow your business through the 45 plus applications Zoho has. And it's a really great tool to for really any firm that's out there nowadays. Let me go ahead and transfer control over to Tyler so he can start the presentation because he has a lot to cover.
All righty, so we can go ahead and jump in. So first thing we'll do here, we'll cover a quick agenda. Everyone seeing that agenda slide? Just make sure it's switching over here.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, we'll go through a quick agenda here. So first we'll touch on just at a top level why you might want to consider implementing a BI tool. That, of course, is business intelligence or business insights, basically just a roll-up term for things that help you report with more granularity. Then we'll actually walk through how to set up the first data source, which is going to be Zoho Books. Basically, in analytics, it's going to store a different copy of the data set that you can use for some reporting. At that point, we'll jump in and do a review of just where everything lives in the workspace, which is for the data people in the room, that's kind of like your data mart where everything is going to live. And then we'll jump into some examples of creating some charts, pivot tables, and dashboards, as we found that those are kind of the most common ones that people are going to get started with. I want to highlight as we do jump into this, the examples and use cases that we talk through here are in no way exhaustive. I kind of selected to go through some specific use cases, but you can do a whole bunch more than what we'll cover just here today. So jumping into the first kind of topic here, why do you want to do this? What's the point of kind of setting up analytics and tying it into Zoho Books? Really, the key thing is that when you're using Zoho Books, you're going to get a bunch of reports out of the box that kind of just come with the product, right? Sales by item, sales by salesperson, unpaid invoices. But, at the end of the day, some of those reports are pretty basic and they might not give you the visual keys and cues that you would like as you're looking at your reporting. So integrating a BI or analytics tool just gives you more options when it comes to how exactly you want to view reports and what data you want to look at as you're actually building them out. So here we'll go ahead and jump into kind of our first topic, which is setting up data sources. So again, these are just the initial steps that we have to take in order to get our data synced over into Zoho Analytics. So here to get started, this is basically what things are going to look like when you turn on Zoho Analytics. Nothing's been set up yet. We don't really have any data here or any workspaces. So up here at the top, you're going to want to check this as you get started just to make sure that you're in the right organization. Sometimes, it's easy to make a trial on accident. So it's good to just check this, make sure that you're in your primary one where you are that account admin. And next, as we actually get into adding in our data, up in the top right, we can go ahead and click the Import Your Data button. That's going to pull up the suite of all of the pre-built connectors. So as you would expect, almost every single Zoho app is going to have a connection into analytics. But you also have a variety of other applications, things like Salesforce, HubSpot, Google Analytics, Google Ads, things like that. So as you're thinking about reporting on your Zoho Books data, kind of another reason that you might want to pull it into a tool like this is, maybe I know it's a dirty word on a Zoho webinar, but maybe you're using Salesforce and you want to compare some of your CRM data to your financial data, and having those all in one suite is going to make that possible. In this case, we're going to scroll down and we're going to go ahead and grab the Zoho Books connection here. I will highlight if you actively are using things like subscriptions and inventory, because those roll up into Books, they're going to come in as well. So you really just need to set up one of these connectors. So as we jump in, just as a little disclaimer here, letting you know what it's going to do. So you're basically going to need to authenticate the account, select what you want to pull in, and then start creating your reports. So as we do that, if we move to our next page here, first, because in Zoho Books, you could have multiple organizations. Maybe your company has, multiple different sub entities under it, and you're carrying separate books for each of those. You want to be particular here to make sure that if you want to do a single organization pull, that you're selecting the right one. Or if you want to do a multiple organization sync, that is now supported, though it's recent and it is currently in beta as of right now. After we select our organization, we kind of get into choosing what exactly we want to pull into Zoho Analytics. So, here basically on our left-hand side where we have customers, you can select a module. And then on the right-hand side, you can select what fields you want to pull in from that module. So a common example here is that by default, it's not going to pull the email address from your customer records into analytics. But if I was going to marry this data up with, form submissions from a Google ad, and I want to see the ROI on my spend, I might want to marry up the data using something like email because I'm going to have it in both places. So you can kind of go through here and decide, which fields are important for you and which ones you might not need to make sure that you're keeping your database really clean and tidy. The other side of things is that not all modules are going to be on by default. So in this case, purchase orders was previously not turned on, so wouldn't be syncing that module in. But I can go ahead and just check that box, and now it's going to pull in that data. I do want to highlight, this is not a one and done type of process. You can always come back and add some more data. So you don't need to stress over it as you're doing your initial setup of making sure you've got every single field you could ever possibly need. You could always come back in and choose to sync in some additional data once you get going with the tool. And you're going to find that you're going to end up doing that because you're going to come up with more and more ideas for reports and find that there are even more use cases than you originally thought. So once we've set up our source, it's going to take a little bit of time to pull in. So we'll do kind of the Martha Stewart, pull out the completed one from the oven here and imagine that now all of our data has actually synced in. So now we're kind of within that workspace. Again, the workspace is where everything lives. I do want to highlight that you can pull more than one source into one workspace. So oftentimes if someone is using a lot of different Zoho apps, we'll pull in things like CRM, projects, desk, Zoho Books, all into one workspace so that we can create reports on them together and look at data that bridges across multiple different applications. So as we get started here, we'll now kind of jump into exactly what each of the components in the workspace is and kind of how you're going to navigate around inside of that workspace. So first here, it's going to drop you into this Explorer view on the top left. This is kind of just a place that you can see everything within one view. The main way that you're going to realistically use this is by opening and closing some of these folders, right? So we've got all of our dashboards under one folder here, and I can go ahead and just expand that out if I want to see particularly dashboards that I have there. You can also search this. So up in the top left here, I've searched for invoice, and now it's going to show me, charts, pivot tables, raw data, as well as dashboards that have to do with invoicing. That's generally the best way to get around in here. I want to highlight with Zoho Analytics, you want to use search bars everywhere that you can because you're going to end up having a lot of different data tables, a lot of different reports in here, and it's going to help you get around quickly. For the purposes of our review today, a lot of the reporting that we're going to do is going to be around invoices and kind of invoice items and sales tracking. But just know that all this different data is in here. And if you see a report that I made and you wanted to make it for maybe a purchase order, you could follow the identical steps just with a different data set to complete that. Kind of moving to the next step here, if we go kind of bottom to top and look at our data. So each of the particular tables that come from our apps, so in this case, just Zoho Books, they're all going to create their own data tables in here that live on the left-hand side of the page. So here I've gone ahead and opened up the invoices table just so we can review it. And you'll see the things that you would expect, right? Your invoice number, the date that the invoice went out, the status, the due date, right? The total of the invoice as a whole. One thing that you'll notice about this table, though, is that it doesn't contain the items. So this gives us something like the total sales amount on the invoice, but not the specific line items that make up that total sales amount. And the reason for that is that you can have many different invoice items for one invoice. So the Zoho Analytics is going to break that into its own table. But within that invoice items table, we have a column for the invoice ID so that things can get linked back up. And now I know for those who are kind of, more in the data minded, we're starting to get nervous. Are we going to need to write a bunch of SQL just to put data back together? You're not for about 95% of use cases. You're only really going to need to do any custom code in here if you need to reorganize tables or do something a little bit more out of the box. But I like to highlight this because oftentimes as people are getting into analytics, one of the biggest humps to get over is just understanding how all these data tables connect and kind of how to understand where you should pull your data from. So in this case, if I knew I wanted to pull a report on like sales by product, invoice items is very likely going to be a place that I'm going to need to go to get that data. Kind of our next section here is the reports themselves. So reports are going to cover everything from pivot tables to charts, and that could be a pie chart, a bar chart, like maybe something multivariate like a heat map, right? All of those are going to get rolled up into your reports. So again, they could look anything like, your top customers by sales. In this case, this is in our demo account. So we just have Billie Eilish and Billy Idol here as our two customers. So, you can create anything from these types of simple bar charts on up. You can also then create things like pivot tables. So again, this is just one of the set of robust default reports that kind of comes out of the box. And so I've just pulled up, one of our examples here for profit by customers. And I guess I should highlight, I'll go back here for a second. If we look at these reports, all of these reports here that are on this left-hand panel, from aging summary by customer all the way down, those are all default reports that come out of the box. Oftentimes, those are going to get you 95% of the way to where you want to go with your reporting. And you're just going to have to kind of tweak them or maybe clone and edit one to make it look exactly how you like. But one of the things that we found that can be really nice about analytics is you're not oftentimes starting from nothing, right? And starting from something that's close to what you want is going to save you a lot of time. So as you get in here, you'll want to review some of these and see, and maybe you look at this bar chart and you're like, what, if that was just a little different, that would actually be exactly what I need. And you can kind of just adjust it from there. Moving on to the last little part of our overview here, looking at dashboards. Again, all of these on the left are just default dashboards that come out of the box. I'll go ahead and open one up, just one about our sales and receivables here, to highlight a couple different important components of a dashboard. So conceptually, a dashboard is just a place to put more than one report. So, you might have a sales by customer, sales by item, items you need to order, right? You just want to have one place to go, one URL that you can bookmark and go directly there to see all of that data. And the dashboard is what's going to do that for you. So up here at the top of the page within our red box, we'll see that the dashboard comes with some filters. These can be customized and added as needed. And the great thing about them is that they're going to filter every single report or widget that's on the dashboard. Now, there is an assumption there. You've got to make sure that, if you're filtering on dates, it gets a little bit more tricky with that timeline filter, which we'll actually cover in detail later. But if you were to apply something like a salesperson filter and you wanted to see, invoices and credit notes, that one salesperson filter could actually filter both of them. So you save a lot of time once you roll everything onto a dashboard. Up here at the top, these kind of small callouts are what Zoho Analytics calls widgets. So they're things that aren't really like a report where you'd have a Y and an X axis and you're kind of looking at something over time. They're just like a quick, top of mind, walk into a wall. It's the first thing you think of, call out metrics that you can use to just get that top down. Oftentimes you can get 90% of the data you need rolled up into these easy to use widgets and kind of roll from there. But when you do need to break things out to look at things maybe month over month or week over week, you can start to create these different charts and reports that we'll see down below that help you add some more context to that data. The next section here is going to be jumping into working with charts and actually creating those. Nathan, did any questions stand out around workspaces that we want to cover now, or should I go ahead and jump into our next section?
To be honest, our analytics support that's kind of in the background, they've been answering almost every question. Let me go and launch our second poll question.
You got it.
And let's see if anything is in the questions panel that you can help out with.
While you're doing that, Nathan, just a comment. I've seen a few people asking for balance sheet, profit and loss, and cash flow statements over in analytics. Folks, those are standard reports out of books. So I don't know why you try to replicate them over here, unless you were maybe wanting to do like a dashboard.
Yeah.
A dashboard. And then, you know, is which specific table you grab, I'm not quite sure. But yeah, a dashboard could be useful.
Yeah. And for a P&L as well, it should be on the Zenatta website under resources and under analytics. The Zoho analytics team actually provided template code if you wanted to recreate one of those inside of analytics. It does require using a SQL table because you need to pull data from like expenses to all the various accounts, income to all the various accounts, and kind of do your roll up that way. But if you wanted to recreate a P&L within analytics, it is possible. You'll just want to check out our website and look at the code because it'll skip you past having to monkey around with too many of the customization steps.
Yeah, sure. I do want to kind of mention one thing that this poll question was just asking if anybody's used a BI tool. And 51% is, no, this is their first experience. This is a great session. I haven't really seen any sessions like this done by too many groups. And that's why we kind of wanted to work with Zenatta on this one for sure.
Another comment there, Tyler, if you don't mind. Somebody's talking about tags. And as far as I know, tags come across to analytics just fine, right?
Yep, it'll pull in your reporting tags.
Yep.
I do believe, as we were talking about earlier with the invoices and invoice items, I think it saves them in a separate table and it links things to those tags. I would want to double check that for you, but I'm pretty sure they end up living in their own little place where you might have to activate it when you're setting up that data source and choosing what you want to pull in.
I've seen a few companies kind of do that to compare different locations and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, awesome. So I think you're good to continue on, Tyler, and later we'll get you back in the questions panel as soon as possible.
Sweet. All righty. So now we'll kind of jump into actually going ahead to create charts. So right out of the gate here, looking at our chart view, up in the top left, that's kind of your master button to create all the things. So in this case, if we want to create a chart, we'll go ahead and click the create button and jump down here to your chart view. Now you might be thinking, oh, what if I wanted to make a funnel versus a pie chart versus a bar chart? You're going to pick that later. The first thing we're going to do is just pick the chart option, and then we can set all that up once we've got our data in. So moving right along here, once you create really any kind of report, whether it was a chart, a pivot, a summary table, it's going to ask you what your base table should be. I want to highlight, this is not legally binding. It doesn't mean this is the only table that you can pull from in this report, but it is important to pick one that makes sense based on what you want to do. So to understand what table would make sense, in this case, if I want to do a report that looked at, invoiced sales month over month, right? Of course, I would want to pull in from the invoices table. But even if I wanted to do something like sales by product month over month, I could still choose that master invoice table because all those invoice items link to it. So you don't have to pick the specific table that all the data lives, as long as you pick one that ideally is kind of above the other in a hierarchy. So our invoices to invoice items, there's kind of a parent-child there, and we'll pick the parent, which in this case will be invoices. So as I was mentioning before, over here on the left, these kind of section that's in the red box there, invoices, customers, estimates, those are basically all of the different data tables that have a direct relationship to invoices. So just because I chose invoices doesn't mean I can't also pull in the customer's name, right? Because we have that relationship. When I click to expand invoices is where we'll actually see all of the various fields that come from that module. And now I'll highlight some of these are really clear, things like due date, right? Subtotal. Those are just fields that are directly pulled from the report or from the data. But one nice thing in analytics is going to give you some quick calculations like age in days, right? So if I want to know how old an invoice is, I don't need to calculate that value here. It's already done that for me by default. So if I wanted to use that later, which spoiler alert, we will, it's already going to be there for us. So in this case, let's say we wanted to create a report for invoiced revenue by month, just kind of a quick and simple one here. So from the left-hand side, I've dragged over our invoice date to the x-axis and subtotal to the y-axis. You know, when you're choosing x-axis or y-axis, generally speaking, anytime you've got a date, that's going to go on your x-axis. If you wanted to do a report by salesperson, that could also go on your x-axis. It's kind of like the thing that you want to compare against each other. So I want to compare this month to last month. The y-axis here, of course, is going to be what we're comparing. So a sum of our subtotal there that doesn't include tax. Now I'll highlight too that I've dragged in x-axis, and in this case, it went ahead and assumed I wanted to do it by month, which is great. But if you did want to do it by quarter, by year, you know, by the week, you can actually click on that little drop down and it's going to expand all of the different sub functions that you can choose to look at that value within. So for here, we're going to keep it by month, but of course that could be changed. It's also going to do the same thing for our y-axis values. So again, it's going to default to sum, which in this case is great. But if you wanted to look at a maximum, an average, you know, a standard deviation, ones that come up a lot are things like count or distinct count. You know, how many new customers have we added this month, right? You'd be looking at something like a count of your customers. I'll also highlight that it goes one level deeper. So I could say I want to see a sum, but I want to see it as a running total month over month. That's all controlled just through these little drop downs. And so now we've got that. We went ahead and generated our report here and we see some of our data start to flow in. Right out of the gate, I look at this report and everyone's got their own preference, but I'd rather see this as a bar chart. And so in this case, I can go ahead up at the top here and start to choose how I want to view it. So generally speaking, you can always come to this 3-dot icon in the red box there and click that to expand it. And it's going to give you the full kind of gambit of chart options. In this case, we'll keep it simple. We'll do something like a vertical bar. And we'll go ahead and take a look at that. Otherwise, though, this whole tab here is going to give you a variety of different options. Everything from scatter plots to heat maps, area under the curve. Under the little caret to the right is your funnels, right? So that's a little bit more applicable for like, you know, sales reporting, but sometimes you might want that for your finance as well. And now I've switched it over to a nice looking little bar chart. Now, from an analytics perspective, the reason that you might want to use a bar chart for something like this is that we're treating each month as its own unit, right? So it's, if you had something like this, looking at it day over day, maybe you might want to have more of a running graph. But the larger difference between your x-axis values, the more likely it is that you're going to want to use a bar chart to represent that data in the best way. The term, if you want to kind of play around with that and do some research on deciding what types of reports to use, is are you looking at continuous data or discrete data? And where continuous is basically as smooth of a trend as possible. But if we're looking at something month over month, we might want to treat them all as kind of their own bucket. So now I've gone ahead and saved this report, and we'll just give it a name and drop it into a folder. Now, the one thing that we'll notice here is out of the gate, the axes look a little funny. So month and year of invoice date and total of subtotal, right? Because analytics is going to apply some naming conventions to things. So up in the top right under the cog, we can go to some of our general settings. And for what we want to do here, we'll go into Axis. And here I'm going to do 3 things. I'm going to change the label for the x-axis to invoice month. I'm going to change the label for y-axis to total. And I'm going to change the data label settings to show the corresponding y-axis as a label on the chart. And that last one is just a lot of words to say, I want to see the total at the top of my bars. Because for me, If I'm like somewhere between 20 and 30,000, I'm a terrible eyeballer and I just want to get a quick look at what that number is. So I always like to turn those on for my reports. So now up in the top right, we can go to view mode here, which is just going to give you a better look at this where you can see, full screen without all those edit options, what your report looks like. So now that we've done kind of a simple one, what if we wanted to make this a little bit more interesting and start looking at it based on salesperson? So I am a lover of stacked bar charts, so I'm going to show you an example of one of those. The reason that I like them is that it lets you see a total and a breakdown at the same time. So over here on the left-hand side, under this box, we'll see we've got salespersons. It's important that you pull it from the salespersons module. Inside of invoices, it'll have a field for salespersons. It's just going to store their ID, which is not very useful because nobody has those 19-digit IDs memorized. So we want to go ahead and pull our salesperson name from this table. And in this case, I'll drop it right into the color section here. It's always fun to just experiment. If you have an idea of what you want it to look like, just drag things around into the various boxes and kind of see where it goes as you do that. In this case, I've dragged it into color, which has now given us two bars next to each other and a legend. Now this is good. This is now giving us a better look at things where I can see who is generating this invoiced revenue. But now as it stands, I don't have an easy way to see a total. And again, for me, I'm bad at mental math, so I don't want to quickly calculate these in my head. So what I'll do is I'll go up to our settings under the chart options, and I'll choose a vertical stacked bar. And so that's now going to look something more like this, where I get to see how much each person sold within a month, and I get to see the total. So I've got my total and I've got a breakdown so that I'm not having to do any mental math or kind of eyeball things to estimate my totals within a given month. You'll find a lot of use cases for reports like this. Nathan, I know you've got another poll we might want to do. Should I take a quick pause and we do that here? Would this be a good time?
Yeah, let's go ahead and launch that. This will be our third one, so we only have one more, so we'll save that one for the end of this session. Tyler,
got it.
Whenever we start answering, whenever you're done with your portion. Let's go ahead and launch the third. So what are ways you can improve your business with a BI tool? Yeah, Tyler, if you want to go ahead and go to that questions tab, I think there's a few, I'm seeing a few like combining different tables and all that, but I think whenever we start talking about dashboards, they'll get a big picture of what that might look like.
Yeah, I don't believe there's actually a limit on tables, right, Tyler? I mean, you can bring in as many tables as you want.
Yeah, there's an upper limit on rows eventually, which of course right? you can upgrade to get more, and that's going to depend on your specific license and number of users. I don't know off the top of my head if there's a limit on the number of tables. I think it's just row-wise, or rows and cells is how it kind of grades you on that.
Yeah, it looks like, and by the way, folks, I believe our tech support, like I say, keep your questions in the questions area. They're trying to follow up behind us, make sure all those get answered. Whatever doesn't get answered live on the session, they're going to reach out and try to reach the answer to you after the session as well. So appreciate your questions. I think you're all doing very well with that.
Perfect. All righty. So I'll just kind of keep this rolling then. So now that we've kind of got this in a format that we like, it's now time to do some fine tuning. So the first thing that pops into my head here is, okay, this is looking at all of our invoices, but what if one of them got voided out, right? What if we sent an invoice to a customer and they said, this isn't right, and we need to void that and then go ahead and update it on our side. So back to our kind of edit view here under filters, we can go ahead and apply filters that are going to apply to the report all the time. The difference there being those filters that I showed you on the dashboard are for users to choose. These filters are us as the report creator saying this should never include these no matter what. So here from the left-hand side under invoice status, I went ahead and dragged that into filters. Now I can choose void from this list. And then over here on the right, I can choose to exclude those. So I could say only include items or exclude these specific items. More often than not, I find myself using exclude because it's just you want to get rid of things that are canceled or voided out, right? And kind of make sure that your data looks good. So now in this case, we've seen our totals have gone down just a little bit, maybe a couple $1,000s there in October from an invoice that got voided out. And now our report is actually going to show us, some proper data that isn't counting things that really shouldn't count. I highlight that because those are the steps I advise you take when you start getting into an analytics tool. Is don't worry about all the nitty-gritty stuff at first. Try to get just used to moving fields around, how to create the type of chart you're looking for, and choosing the right type of chart so that it makes sense based on your data. Then kind of do that quality control check and go, okay, now what might be in here that shouldn't be, like a voided invoice? And then we can go ahead and filter those out. So now we're going to do one more little report here under our charts that we're going to look at invoice items. So we'll go through this one relatively quick, but it's really just to highlight the point that over here on the left, even though I'm using invoice date as my x-axis, I don't need to use something from my invoice table as my y-axis. So here I'm basically saying, show me this based on the date of the invoice as a whole, but I want to see the totals based on what item they are. So similar to how I'm seeing the total for the invoice based on salesperson in our previous example, here I'm looking at the totals for the invoice items based on that invoice date. And so again, we'll kind of go through this here. We'll look at a little product sales by month where I've got my invoice date for my invoices. And now that I've got that created, we'll go ahead and view it. So again, in this case, we're looking at a stacked bar because we're looking month over month, and we still want to see that breakdown. So now we've got our totals here, rather than being broken up by salesperson, they're now broken up by item. I'll save this for maybe an advanced session that we could do later. You might be asking, what if I want to see both? Well, you surely can, just maybe not with the stacked bar. That's where you start maybe needing to do some heat maps or, multi-axis reporting. But we'll keep that for maybe a future session where we dig a little bit further into some of those more advanced reporting options. Yeah, so here, now that we've kind of created a couple charts and set a baseline, I'll check real quick, Nathan, any need to pause here? Should I just go ahead and jump right into pivot tables?
Go ahead. Yeah, let's go ahead and continue on. I know there's a few questions in there, but a lot of it is relating to the P&L and how to, more technical questions, I guess, that you can't answer.
Got it. Totally. Cool. So I'll go ahead and jump through to pivot tables now, everybody's favorite. So here, back at our homepage, we'll go ahead and create a new report. This time it's going to be a pivot rather than a chart. So let's say I wanted to look at kind of some similar data here, but from a pivot view. We can look at our salesperson invoiced revenue by month. So here we've got a couple different things. We've got columns, rows, and data. For this first example, we're just going to look at rows and data, and then I'll show you an example that has columns. If you're used to working with pivot tables in Excel, this is going to be pretty straightforward for you. You're probably going to be comfortable with it once you see what each of those means. So first, we're going to put our main grouping factor here in. That's going to be for the salesperson. So I'll go ahead and drag in their name. Now I'm going to go up to the invoices table, and I'm going to choose the invoice date as a second factor to group by. So that's kind of going to create our two different sections that will look at totals and groupings like you normally would on a pivot table. Last but not least, I'll go ahead and grab the invoice total and drop that into the data value. Again, just like I showed you on the chart, you can make that a sum, an average, a minimum, a maximum, and you could even add it more than once. So if you wanted to look at their total and their average, you would just drag that column in twice and change that sub function that it's going to use determine the value. Again, we'll go through and apply that same filter, right? Just to make sure we don't have any void invoices. And then we'll go ahead and generate it. So we've got kind of a simple pivot table here where we're looking at each user as grouping number 1, and then the invoice date as grouping number 2. So we'll see our rows here create these kind of grayed out sections where we're looking at hard-coded data, whereas our data is going to give us that sum, which is really the meaningful data here that is within each of those groupings. So for Ben Otta in October 2021, they had $24,000 in revenue. Now, what we might also want to see here is, well, what if I want to see their total and I want to see what's been paid, right? So I can kind of get an idea of what we might still have outstanding. What you can do is down here in the very, very bottom left, and this isn't the only place to make these, but it's the one that I oftentimes find myself using, we can create an aggregate formula. Now, aggregate formulas are just a way to get a little bit more fancy with some logic or conditions when you're doing math in these values. So once we create that, first thing it's going to do, ask us for a name and a data type, and then give us a place to actually enter in the formula. So let's say I wanted to look at a paid invoice amount, and I'm going to make sure that that's a currency field. And in this case, because I want a sum, but I want to have a condition on it, basically in English, I want to get a sum of invoice total where the invoice status has been paid. I can go ahead and choose a sum if column. Now I took this screenshot like here to kind of guide you in that you can start typing things and it's going to try to fill in or suggest what it thinks you're going to go for. So when I start typing sum here, it's going to give me one that's just a straight up sum, and then one that's a sum if that allows me to use a condition. And so in this case, I would choose the sum if here. And then I can enter in my condition. So on the right-hand side, I can pull from any of those columns. So I would look at something like invoice status. And I could say, okay, take it out of the oven here. Invoice status is closed. I want a sum of our subtotal. Otherwise, it should be 0. So if it's not a closed invoice, it counts as 0 in this calculation. Now that I've done that, it's just added itself as another column here. And I can drag it in and add it to our report as the paid amount. Looking into the kind of view mode here, we can see it's over here on the far right. And as we would expect for these invoices that are, future dated into November, we haven't been paid on those yet because maybe they haven't been sent, or they're kind of in draft, or the customer just knows they're not due at this time. Now, I'll do another one here that will look at the columns. And this is one that is a pretty common use case, is looking at aging invoices by salesperson. So again, we'll kind of go quick on the first steps here. We'll use that salesperson name again, and we'll use that invoice total again within our data columns. But over in the column grouping here, we'll pull in that age in days value. Again, I didn't have to calculate that. I didn't have to add a formula or write a function in books to give me that value. It just comes across because they assume you're going to need it for reports like this. And so I've gone ahead and dragged that into the columns view. Now, before I get too much into the data, we'll want to look at our filters here and see that in this case, because I want to look at things that are aging, I only want to see ones that are overdue. If this has already been paid, then it's not really an aging invoice because we're good on it. It's not an open receivable now. So we'll go ahead and filter out to only include those overdue invoices. And so back to looking at our column, if we look at our age in days, it's going to make a guess and see, what kind of range you might want. But in this case, let's say I wanted to look at this within 10-day blocks, so 0 to 10 days old, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, and kind of group them up that way. We can actually choose our range specifically within this little sub function. And so here, I'll go ahead and add a new range. Range size, we're just going to make this 10 in this case. This could be really any value that you want. And now we'll see when we go ahead and generate and view that pivot table that it's grouped this up, 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, and 30 to 40 days old, that we have these unpaid invoices. So in this case, we might pull this report and realize, Zenatta is sending out a lot of invoices that people aren't really paying. It might be for product they don't need. They might be not getting proper approval before they're sending these out, right? And so we might want to have a meeting with them and figure out, what's going on where a lot of these invoices are kind of lagging. Are they real? Can we expect that we're going to get paid on these if it's, 30 to 40 days old? Versus if we look at Zenatta, most of theirs are within that 0 to 10 day window, which of course everyone's payment terms are different. But let's say, that might be within an acceptable period where, it's fine that they haven't paid that quite yet. So again, that's kind of the power there of the pivot tables, anything from like a simple sum grouped by user, all the way up to things where you're looking at data over time with those various groupings. Last but not least, we'll kind of jump into dashboards, which are that primary way to look at things kind of all rolled up together onto one page.
Yeah, just a reminder, Tyler, we have about 15 minutes or so.
Yep.
Let me talk about this example for just a few minutes here, folks. I asked for this example to have it in this session for a specific reason. Many companies focus on traditional metrics like total sales. If you looked at both these salespeople by total sales, you'd think they were pretty even. Looking at your screen right now, it's slide 100 or 101. I got to make sure I'm on the right slide. I think
it's 100.
100. Make sure I'm like slide 100. What you're going to see, folks, is one of these salesmen is actually overselling the product. We actually had this happen to my old firm when we were doing a lot of tech installations, and we hired a salesman to go out and sell those, and he didn't really understand the system. And before we knew it, he had oversold us in a lot of spots where we had to fix and buy ourselves back out of. So actually seeing sales by salesperson, by aging, where you're having trouble collecting, that's the kind of thing where analytics can show you a big problem, where most companies would just say, oh, total sales, give them both a bonus. This is a type of insights you're looking to do with analytics, digging deeper than normal, regular financials and trying to find that extra little twist that is missing in what you're trying to figure out.
Yep. And the key there, you know, we would call these a lot, are very actionable insights. Like you can look at this and it spurs you to make a change or make an adjustment or a training to try to adjust what these numbers look like, you know, 30 days from now.
Right. Very good.
And you haven't really haven't talked about it much, but you know, we're pulling in books here, but you can also pull in CRM.
Yep.
And then you can mix and match. Maybe you've got deliverables tracked in CRM or stuff over in Zoho projects, and then you've got books, and you basically, you can pull in all of the different data sets, and they don't have to just be Zoho data sets. You can pull in from virtually anything. And then kind of get some really, really deep dives. And we're kind of scratching the surface here, but it's funny you brought that up, Val, because this is kind of how we run the entire company, is looking at all the data by developer and salesperson and senior consultants. And you have to do that to have a handle on what's going on in your organization.
Yeah. And the next section that Tyler's going to cover is over the, you know, the beautiful dashboards where you can really kind of see that data in one place. So you don't have to keep pulling these reports. So.
And this part, I'll go through this one a little quicker than the previous, not as technical. Really, a lot of this stuff is drag and dropping, kind of just getting things to look pretty. So we'll be able to go through this one relatively fast. So again, here, our primary create button, we'll open that up and we'll make a new dashboard. It's going to start you kind of like a tabula rasa here, blank slate, where we can add in the reports that we'd like. So over here on the left-hand side, I've put all of these into my own little custom books reporting folder so that they're easy to find for me. I advise that you do that. And if you get in good folder habits early on, a future you is going to be really happy. So in this case, I'll go ahead and just click one of these and drag it on, where it's going to give me that kind of drag and drop interface. And now I've added it here. Now, right off the gate, I look at this, that's way too small, right? So I can go ahead and kind of grab the corner of it and just drag it to expand it. That's going to work basically like any tool that you've ever played with before, you know, a little bottom corner sizing things up. Now I'll go ahead and drag in the second chart we made, the product sales by month, but I don't need to manually size this one. I can actually just click on the other report that I have sized nicely. I can go down to the bottom here under copy dimensions, and then I can click the smaller report and choose to paste those dimensions down there. So now I've got them two to be exactly the same size. If you guys are like anything like me, things being slightly different sizes makes you go a little bit crazy. So I like to get all those just pixel perfect where they're all exactly the same. Now, as you're kind of building out dashboards, it's oftentimes going to include data from a lot of different sources or types or kind of meanings. And we can create these little text headers to keep things organized. So I'll go ahead and create a text header up in the top right. I'll drop in something like monthly trend reports. And then I can size that up to the top of the page and give it just a little header so that if, you know, when you've made this report, it's going to be really obvious to you what everything means. But for someone that you might be showing it to, it's nice to just give them kind of a guide as they're looking down the page on what each of these sections is referring to. So here I've done the same thing with our pivot tables, right? So I created them a header and then I went ahead and just dragged and dropped them in. So they're all on this same page, right? Where we have our master sales management dashboard, and it's got our monthly trends as well as our pivot table breakdowns to see data in a couple different ways based on how we like it. A general best practice, I personally like to put all my pretty and colorful charts up at the top. And then I save pivot table breakdowns and more tabular data for the nerds who want to scroll down to the bottom and dig into that stuff. Just helps keep things clean and kind of clear as people are reviewing your dashboards. So here, I'll go ahead and show you a couple things around filtering. So up in the top left under user filters, we can go ahead and start adding in some values that we want to be able to quickly select from. So I'll grab, again, a key thing here, I'll grab from the salesperson table, I'll grab the salesperson's name. And I'll also grab this timeline filter, which is a unique filter for the dashboards, which is very, very, very useful. And I'll show you how to set that up in a moment. So now we've got both of our filters. I'll go ahead and go into the edit page for the name filter, and I can choose things like what it should display as. Maybe I want to make this clear and call it salesperson name. And I can choose, do I want to just select one, or do I want the option to select multiple people within this? I went ahead and chose to make this multiple. And then lastly, if you only wanted to count certain sales reps, you could only select their values. In this case, we want to count them both, so we'll just keep both of them selected for the salesperson filter. Now the timeline filter here, we'll go ahead into the edit page there. And it's always going to give you these relative values, you know, today, this week, this month, but we might want to add some more. So under the edit page, we can go ahead and select some additional filters. So maybe I want to go over to the month tab here, and I want to grab previous month and last 3 months. You know, those are kind of common ones you're going to want to take a look at when you're pulling up a dashboard. Within there, I can set one as a default. So if last 3 months is kind of my go-to, I can make that my default filter that'll apply the minute that I pull up a dashboard. Now, a key thing with the timeline filter is that it is going to try to assume the best date to use to filter a given thing. But you could have more than one date in a data table. So in invoices, for example, you've got an invoice date and a due date, right? So under the little more settings and under options, we have a little section where we can choose exactly what date we want to use to filter a particular component. So in this case, I want to filter that by invoice date. Now, if we take a look at this dashboard, I can choose to filter maybe just to see Zenatta's data. And I can choose to see it, you know, maybe just for this month. And we'll see that our filters kind of stack as we go and affect each of the different charts and reports that are on this dashboard. Now, the last little thing I'll show quickly here is adding a widget. So up in the top right, we can go ahead and choose to add a widget value. Here, it's going to give you a selection of a whole bunch of different widgets. If you just want to call out value, if you want it to be comparative in some way, or if you want it to be like progress to a particular goal. In this case, I'll choose one of these comparative ones in the middle, where we might want to look at this month versus last month. Now we'll choose what we want to look at for our data. So I want to look at a sum of our invoice totals. I want to group it by our invoice date. And this is actually default for this component, so we don't need to do anything here. But I want to look at the latest value, so this month, versus the previous value, so last month, as our default comparator. In the filters, we'll do our same thing here, so we can filter by any of those values. Here we'll do invoice status. And then lastly, under setting, you'll always want to give these a name. I think the default name on this one was just October 2021. So we want to give that a nice, easy to understand name so that people can see that later and just get it intuitively. And then last but not least, you know, this will basically just pull in that value from our report, looking at invoiced revenue for this month versus the previous. And that, of course, the minute that it's November 1st, that's going to update to be that next month and the data that's relevant for then. Lastly, we'll go into view mode and just kind of look at this top down. So once we've got our dashboard put together, this is basically your master page that you can go to review this data anytime you need to see it and apply any of your various filters to slice and dice it, you know, based on what questions you had for that day. And I think that wraps it up on our side. If we want to jump into any questions or any announcements from the Zoho team here.
Yeah, go ahead and go to the contact page at the end, Tyler. Actually, I'll take control away from you.
Sure.
Don't mean to be so abrupt with that. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, we'll need to run that final poll. And folks, we would have loved to have made this like a 3-hour event. I'm sure you're all dying like, oh, gee, I'd like to go back through some of that and see detail more in the calculations and how to bring tables together and tie fields and do more. Maybe another day. What we wanted to do today is show you what's possible and still get you deep enough to where you can see some of the advanced features there. So I think Zenatta did a beautiful job of both introducing and getting you deep pretty quick into what can be possible with analytics.
Yeah, thanks for that, Val. And here's their contact information as well with this last poll. Go ahead and launch it. And I know there was a ton of questions. Our support did a great job, but if you would like Zenatta to contact you to learn, so you can learn more about analytics or any of their other Zoho services, please select yes, and they'll reach out to you shortly. The thing about that is
a couple
oh, go ahead, Brett.
No, I was just going to say a couple things here. If you don't know, we talked about it earlier, but our YouTube channel is a great resource. We're always making tutorial videos. If you also subscribe to our newsletters and on a newsletter, that is our weekly, basically a rundown of everything that happened in the world of Zoho last week. And it's what we also cover on the CRM Zen Show, which is our weekly podcast that goes out there. And they're all really, really, I think, tight resources. And oftentimes, we hear from you. If you head over to Zenatta.com, drop us a line. It's Tyler at Zenatta.com, Brett at Zenatta.com. Our email structure is fairly simple. People often asking, man, could you do a quick tutorial on this? And, if it fits in, we will do it. We'll post up on YouTube, post up on the website. And oftentimes we do our CRM Zen Show live every Friday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And there's quite an active chat community in there where a ton of questions are asked. And at the end of the show, we basically go through and try to answer all those questions as well. So a bunch of ways to kind of get, stuff past this. And Val and Nathan, I think we're probably going to do another one of these where maybe we can expound on some of this.
Right.
Yeah,
excellent, Brett. Thank you. And folks, they have wonderful resources. So consider what they're offering you here, because I would be on the newsletter in a heartbeat and looking at their YouTube channel for more information.
Yeah, that's so funny that Brett kind of brings that up, because it is free resources. And like I mentioned earlier in the show, that's what I actually use to help me with the interview process, because whenever you go to Zoho.com, you kind of think, what is a Zoho? Val always says that. And it can be overwhelming at times, and it's great to have a great resource to kind of narrow your focus.
Thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And that concludes the end of the session. I will end it, and evaluation will pop up. Please fill it out if you need a CPE credit. And also, if you don't need a CPE credit, we ask that you fill it out as well. It just helps us kind of improve our session and let us know how great of a job Zenatta did, because I think they did wonderful. And I'm going to have to go back and rewatch it myself. Appreciate it, everyone. Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Tyler.
Yep. Thanks, everyone, for watching. We appreciate it.
Everyone.